Hey guys, LC Holt here, and this is my update for June the 10th. Today we got an interesting show. We're going to be talking about what I feel is quite possibly the perfect film trilogy. And I'm going to try and state throughout this show why I feel that way. What's the film trilogy, you might ask? Back to the Future. Joining me is another Back to the Future fan, Rebecca Ivy, sitting over here to my immediate right.
Hello.
And direct from Arizona, we missed you last week, Zach Myers.
I got caught up in time travel and that never works. So that's why I wasn't here for the last show. But I made it this week. So
You were in 1955.
that was a whole year. I'm joking.
But anyway, so here we go with the Back to the Future. We got a lot to cover. We got 3 movies here and a lot of backstory. What I'm going to start with is the backstory of the original film. The original film came out July the 3rd of 1985. Now that date, 1985, is a very important date, not just for when the film came out, but to the story itself. But we got to back up a little bit before, like a good ways before July the 3rd, 1985. We got to go back to the late 70s when a guy named Robert Zemeckis and a writer named Bob Gale made a movie called Used Cars.
Yes, I watched that recently.
And what did you think of Used Cars?
It's Kurt Russell.
Yeah, it's a pretty funny movie.
It is.
Yeah, and Robert Zemeckis would later go on to do movies like Forrest Gump and Contact, What Lies Beneath, which is one of my favorites of his. But long before that and long before Back to the Future, he was just a guy trying to get his films made. And it was not particularly easy because Used Cars was made and it was not a very successful movie. So him and Bob Gale, around the time that Used Cars was coming out, decided, we should do another thing and we need to get going because we need to get a film made that's going to make somebody some money. And so Bob Gale, who was a screenwriter, said that one day he found his parents' yearbook in his old house. And he saw that his dad was president of his senior class. And Bob Gale said, I hated the president of my senior class. He was a real asshole. So he started to think, if I went back and met my dad in high school, would I have liked him? And the germ of this idea was where Back to the Future came from. He presented this to Robert Zemeckis. Robert Zemeckis said, well, that's kind of a neat idea. Let's develop it. And they did. In 1980, they finished their first script for Back to the Future. It was a very different script than the film that was eventually made. And no one wanted to make this script when they presented it to people. Now, what's kind of funny is in the original script, the time machine was a refrigerator. The main character, who was a high school student, was going to climb into a refrigerator that had been turned into a time machine and go back and meet his father in the 1950s. Now, the reason, can you guess the reason why?
So did the refrigerator have to be at a certain temperature?
I think
88 degrees.
I have no idea, but I could tell you this much. The reason they didn't, can you guess why they didn't want to do that idea ultimately, Zach?
No, I can't.
Because they didn't want children climbing into refrigerators.
Well, I guess that's a good reason.
Yeah, they were like, well, maybe we should change the refrigerator. And so they walked around the room, and were like trying to figure out what to do instead. Ultimately, what they decided to do was to make the time machine mobile. And they made a very brilliant decision. They decided, we're going to make it a car. And not only are we going to make it a car, we're going to make it a DeLorean. Now, people nowadays probably don't know what the hell a DeLorean was, and probably would not remember DeLoreans if not for this movie. But DeLoreans were a car that were manufactured, a really sleek stainless steel car that was kind of boxy, but was cool in the 80s. People wanted DeLoreans. They're like, the doors opened upwards. They were like this, and the doors opened up like wings, which is something that's known in the Back to the Future films.
And wasn't Carson an investor in the DeLorean?
Carson?
Johnny Carson.
Yes, he was. Yeah. The DeLorean actually they didn't manufacture very many of them. And by the time Back to the Future was made, the DeLorean was kind of out of style because the Back to the Future didn't get going until like 1984. And that's when they got Steven Spielberg involved. They were friends with Steven Spielberg, who himself had become very popular after Raiders of the Lost Ark. They actually wrote, Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, few people know this, they wrote a movie called 1984, I believe it was called, or 1940, what was it, 1941? 1941.
Yeah.
It was the one Steven Spielberg movie that he made that flopped. So Zemeckis and Bob Gale are in this position where they're going, you know, nothing we do is successful. We got to do something that's successful. And at first, they didn't really want to use Steven Spielberg as a producer for Back to the Future because they thought, well, we tried to do this Spielberg thing and maybe we're jinxing him or he's jinxing us. And they also didn't want to be known as like Steven Spielberg's less successful friends who just need their buddy to get the movie made. So for a while, they kind of turned away from Spielberg. They went to Disney. And Disney looked at Back to the Future, the script, and said, wait a second. There's a scene in this movie where the teenage boy, Marty McFly, goes back to 1955 and is in a car with his teenage mother, who then grabs him and plants a kiss on his face. That's incest. Disney is not going to make a movie where a son is being seduced by his own teenage mother. So needless to say, they turned it down. So ultimately what they decided to do is they're like, fuck this jinx thing. We got to go to Steven Spielberg. They went to Steven Spielberg, who had a development deal, and Spielberg was like, we're going to make this movie. And so that's how the film got greenlit, with Steven Spielberg as a producer. So they basically kind of went around the barn to get to the door. And and which is kind of ironic if you've ever seen the movie, because there's a thing about barns and doors and stuff. But anyway, what ultimately happened is that they had to go into the casting process of this movie. It was always meant to be a comedy. They wanted to cast a young actor named Michael J. Fox, who was famous for a show called Family Ties, which was produced by Gary Goldberg. Exactly. And the problem was Family Ties was going to shoot during the time they were going to shoot Back to the Future. So when Robert Zemeckis came to Gary Goldberg and said, we really want your star of your show to be in this movie, Goldberg was like, no, we're shooting a series that's very successful. I'm not loaning you my star when I need him on set to shoot this movie or to shoot this television show. So so they lost it. That they were like, well, we can't cast Michael J. Fox. The producer's not going to let him out of shooting the show. So they went and they tried to find a new Marty McFly, and they cast an actor named Eric Stoltz. Now, up until now, Eric Stoltz had done one really impressive movie. He'd actually done more than one movie, but the one that really blew him up in terms of people going, whoa, who's that guy? He's a great actor, was a movie called Mask. And in that movie, he played a man with teenager with severe facial deformities, who had a very loving mother who was played by Cher. It's a true story. And it was about his life and the troubles that he had because of his facial deformities. And it's a really good movie. And he does an incredible job in it. And so based on that, they were like, this guy's a great actor. He can do this. So let's cast Eric Stoltz, which is what they did. Do you know Eric Stoltz, Zach? I mean, not personally, but his work?
No. I'm gonna be honest. Right when you said his name, I thought of Mask, and then I was just like, because I have seen that movie so many times in my life, and my mom was a big Cher fan, so she kind of showed me that movie. That's why she really liked it. But yeah, the moment you said his name, I was like, oh, Mask. So yeah.
Yeah, and then he was also the drug dealer in Pulp Fiction. And if you remember, do you remember the Evil Angels movie, The Prophecy, with Christopher Walken? He was the angel that Christopher Walken kills in the first half of that movie. You know.
Yeah, tons of others like The Butterfly Effect, and he's been in a lot of movies. But yeah, right. For some reason, every time I hear his name, I just instantly go to The Mask for some reason.
He's also in Mad About You.
The TV show?
Mm-hmm. He
Oh,
made guest
that's right.
appearances.
You're right.
He was
He
Helen
was.
Hunt's ex.
Yeah.
He's done stuff. Like he's
Yeah. So Eric Stoltz was hired to be Marty McFly, and Leah Thompson was hired to be the mother, Marty's mother, and future love interest in the story.
Was this before or after Howard the Duck?
I think this was around the same time
Around
as
the same
Howard
time.
the Duck.
Okay.
Yeah. But what happened was, and also a guy named Thomas Wilson was hired to actually. This is I could go into this whole rabbit hole, but Thomas Wilson was actually not the original Biff. Okay, there were a lot of casting changes, and I'm about to get into that, and it all revolves around Eric Stoltz. But Leah Thompson was hired to play the mother. Crispin Glover was hired to play the father, Marty McFly's father, George. And so those were the key cast members that stayed. And of course, Christopher Lloyd. Christopher Lloyd, who was an actor known for many great character performances. Taxi, everyone knows Taxi, the crazy zany character he played. He was also in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He was a theater actor, very accomplished, and it wasn't like Christopher Lloyd, come audition for me. They were like, Christopher Lloyd, would you do this movie? And at first, he was thinking, I'd rather do this play I was going to do in Connecticut, and he turned it down. He didn't even read the script. And then one of his friends came to Christopher Lloyd and said, maybe you shouldn't just, completely shrug off this movie thing, because you always have theater to do. But right now, people are offering you movies. So maybe just take a look at this. And so Christopher Lloyd took a look at it, talked to Robert Zemeckis. He liked the pitch, and he was in the movie. So you had those cast members: Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Eric Stoltz. And they started shooting the movie. And they shot the movie for about 5 weeks, which is a long time. That's, over a month of photography. And what happened was Robert Zemeckis started looking at this footage, and he realized Eric Stoltz is a great dramatic actor. But his comedy timing and his comedy sensibility is totally different than what we want for this movie. We want to do like a lighter movie, and Eric Stoltz is playing this like it's Shakespeare. And he went to Steven Spielberg and he said, I've really tried to make this work. And Zemeckis has taken a lot of the blame for this on himself. I saw an interview where he said, I was a young guy, I was arrogant, I thought that I could just make it work. So he says a lot of it is my fault because I knew it probably wasn't going to work the way I wanted it to. But they continued on. And after 5 weeks, it kind of hit a dead end. And Steven Spielberg looked at the footage cut together, and he was like, I kind of get what you're saying. And so a decision was made. And that decision was to fire Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly. Now, the problem is you have most of the movie shot. So the studio, amazingly, say that again, Zach?
He's a little over a month. I mean, that's just so much footage to just like.
A lot of money.
It's a lot of money too. Yeah. And it's just like, wow, that sucks.
The truth is, if Steven Spielberg hadn't been involved in this, it probably would have gone a completely different route. We probably would have had a different movie with Eric Stoltz. But because you had Spielberg, I think the studio was like, okay, we're going to try something here. I'm going to allow you to go back and reshoot this with another actor if you're absolutely positive that it will not work in this form. And Zemeckis said, we're absolutely positive, but we have to get one actor. This is the person we've always wanted for this part. And it's not going to be easy to get him because he's on a TV show, and his name is Michael J. Fox. And so Zemeckis, Bob Gale, Steven Spielberg, and the studio went to Gary Goldberg and said, is there any way we can make this work? And Gary Goldberg said, I'll tell you what, if the production of Back to the Future does not in any way hinder Family Ties, then I'll let Michael J. Fox see the script, and if he wants to do it, we'll work it out. And Michael J. Fox wanted to do it. And so basically, when they resumed shooting, this is what Michael J. Fox had to do. He had to rehearse and shoot Family Ties 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, until 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, he would leave Family Ties, go and shoot Back to the Future all night until 5 in the morning. Then he'd have to be back on the set of Family Ties at 10 o'clock. Then on the weekends, he shot daytime stuff for Back to the Future. So basically, Michael J. Fox was working 7 days a week doing a TV show in the daytime and Back to the Future at night and on weekends. Now, that is one hell of a schedule because you're the star of both. Mm-hmm. And so that's how they did it. And somehow he survived that schedule. And they made the movie. Now, they had to do some recasting because Michael J. Fox is a short guy. And Eric Stoltz is not a particularly short guy. And so the original actor they cast as Biff was not a very big guy. But he was comparable in size to Eric Stoltz. He's actually in the movie. He's one of Biff's cronies.
Yeah.
But they decided they wanted a bigger Biff to show a size difference between the short Michael J. Fox and just like a really big guy. So they hired a really great actor named Thomas Wilson to play Biff. And so he came on. They kept Crispin Glover, of course. They kept Leah Thompson, even though she was a little sore about the Eric Stoltz thing because they were friends. Yeah, they were friends in real life. But they resumed shooting. And they also had a different Jennifer. Marty McFly has a girlfriend in the movie named Jennifer, and it was originally a different actress. And when Eric Stoltz got fired, they thought this actress doesn't have. She was cast for the chemistry with Eric Stoltz. So now we need to recast a girlfriend with chemistry with Michael J. Fox. So they got a actress named Claudia Wells to play Jennifer. And so they shot the movie. Finally, they went through the whole thing. They reshot the 5 weeks. Supposedly, there is no Eric Stoltz anywhere in this movie. Thomas Wilson, to this day, claims that there's maybe one shot of Eric Stoltz where Marty McFly punches Biff in the diner in 1955. Thomas Wilson says he thinks that's Eric Stoltz's fist coming into the frame, punching him in the face. But he can't, mainly because he doesn't remember reshooting that. But I don't see how that's possible because Eric Stoltz had a different Biff. Mm-hmm. But that's what Thomas Wilson says. So, but anyway, whatever. The film was made, really interesting film. And I guess now we can go through sort of the story of the actual movie. So basically what the movie is about is it's about a young guy named Marty McFly in 1985. He has very sad sack parents who are in their mid-40s whose lives did not go the way that they intended it to. And Marty has an older, really zany friend that nobody in town thinks is anything but a lunatic, a guy named Doc Brown, who has invented nothing that works. Like what everybody knows about Doc Brown is that he had a family fortune that he squandered inventing shit that doesn't work. But Doc Brown tells Marty that one night in 1955, I was trying to change a light bulb and I fell, I slipped, and I hit my head. And this vision came to me for a device called the flux capacitor. What is a flux capacitor, you might ask? Who knows?
The thing which makes time travel possible.
That's right. The only thing you need to know, we're not going to get any more technical than it's the thing that makes time travel possible. And it's in the in the DeLorean. And so, but the problem is Doc Brown has built this DeLorean out of parts that he stole from Libyan terrorists. There's the 80s right there, the Libyan terrorists. And so anyway, Marty, through a contrivance of events, winds up in the time machine, racing away from the Libyan terrorists who have killed Doc Brown. And just in trying to get away from the terrorists, he goes back in time by hitting 88 miles per hour. Now, it's an interesting thing about the design of this DeLorean time travel vehicle. Partly it was designed by a guy named Ron Cobb. Ron Cobb is a great conceptual designer. He worked on movies like Alien, the original one. And I think he worked on Aliens too. But he came up with this idea of what this ship might, or what this car might look like. And so they went through all these tests about, would you see when the time machine went back in time, would it be shooting through a portal or something? And what they decided was they had some neon on this thing. And let's just light up the neon, and these bolts would come out of the neon, and they said that the bolts would just hit the front of the car and create this portal, and it would just shoot through, but the portal would be so fast that it would just be like, it would just disappear. So neon, very 80s. And it was a neat thing because the time travel is instantaneous in the movie. They don't go into any sort of, we're flying through a time portal or anything.
Not like Bill and Ted.
Not a Bill and Ted thing, or really like anything else. Even if you go back to the H.G. Wells adaptation of Time Machine, you know, the time travel, you saw things growing and, you know, disappearing, and the world was changing around you. This is just, you go through this thing, it's instantaneous. So without going too much into detail about the story, Marty McFly meets his father, who is a weakling, played by Crispin Glover, George McFly. And he meets his mother as a teenager, and his mother has a thing for him.
Because he accidentally was the one that got hit by the car. Remember, it was Florence Nightingale.
She has a Florence Nightingale effect, because that's how she met George McFly. Is he got hit by the father's car, and she nursed him, and she fell in love with him. Well, in the new past, Marty got hit by the car, and she nursed him and fell in love with him. Didn't realize he was her son from the future. So this is all kinds of. We're not going to go into the incest thing, okay? But it is kind of creepy if you sit down and you really think about it. But it's funny too. I mean, it's not played gross. It's played for the humor of, oh God, my mom likes me. Ew. You know, it's not like it's, you know. But anyway, what happens is you have to have plutonium to use this time machine. They don't have any Marty didn't have any plutonium in his back pocket, so they got to figure out a way how to get Marty back to the future. Hence, the title. And so that's what the movie's about. It's about waiting until a lightning bolt hits the clock tower, and then Doc is going to line up all these, you know, cables and make a hook that sticks out of the back of the flux capacitor. And when the lightning bolt hits the flux capacitor, it's going to, you know, it's all this MacGuffin stuff. But the thing is, that's not going to happen for a week. So Marty gets to sit there for a week, and he gets to hang out with his parents in 1955. And that's what mainly the movie is about. There's a dance. He kind of...
He has to fix the mistake he made.
Right. He's got to get his mother out of love with him, okay, and in love with his father, because if the mother doesn't fall in love with the father, he will never have existed. And what they use as a visual reference for this, which is really clever, is he has a photograph of him and his brother and his sister, and in the photograph, they're all starting to disappear. So when it gets to the point where he disappears, that means that the parents never got together, he never existed, and so he's just going to fade out of existence. So you have this ticking time bomb thing going. It's a good, you know, it's like a screenwriting trope. You have the clock is ticking, and you got to get this done by this point, or else this is going to happen, and the stakes have to be high. So the stakes here are Marty will not exist if he doesn't get his mother in love with his father. And the way you have to do that is you got to get them to kiss at the dance. And so that's what this week is building up to, both the dance and the lightning bolt.
It happens the same night.
it just happens to happen the same night. Because destiny, right, Zach?
You got to do something. You can't disappear.
Do you think you would like your parents if you met them as younger people?
Probably. It's weird because, like, you know, my dad was like a hippie rocker, you know, biker type thing, and my mom was like a disco bunny. So like that would have been really like odd. My mom would have probably been really annoying, but my dad would have been pretty awesome. But I mean, he probably would. I mean, he'd be too stoned to even know who I was.
Well, that's interesting because, well, I guess it's 1955, so there's not a lot of drugs in this movie. I mean, probably because they wanted to do it family oriented, but if it was
at the end with the musicians.
Yeah, the musicians are smoking weed at the end. That's right. Yeah. Good call. Chuck Berry's cousin.
Yes.
But needless to say, Marty gets his father and his mother to kiss, and this singular kiss warms their hearts, and they fall in love, and all those pictures just go, and everything's put back the way it should have been. Mother's out of love with her son and in love with the father.
Or so we think. Everything goes back to the way it was.
Say that again, Zach.
The way it should be.
The way it should be. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I was saying he thinks everything's going to be the same until he gets back and things are different. But
right, because spoiler, he gets back. They send him back to the future. But he gets back. But the thing is, before he comes back, he's sitting in the car and he's like, when I left, the Libyans shot Doc. Doc is my best friend, but I'm sitting in a time machine. Why can't I just go back 10 minutes before I left, get there and save Doc from the Libyans? So he puts in,
he also wrote a letter to Doc.
He did. He wrote a letter to Doc in the past and gave it to Doc. And Doc in the first movie is very much about, I can't know my future, because if I know my future, it could change everything. And just Doc is very, he's sort of like the sky is falling. There's a henny penny quality to Doc, because he's always like, this could rip apart the universe, which I guess
space-time continuum.
That's right, the space-time continuum. So when Marty goes back, he goes back 10 minutes earlier. There is a starting issue with the car that's set up many times. He can't get the car to restart. So he has to run on foot. By the time he gets to the Twin Pines Mall, which is now the Lone Pines Mall, we're not going to go into that because we've got 2 more movies to talk about. But if you've seen the movie, you know the joke on that. But he doesn't get there in time to stop Doc from being shot by the Libyans. And he runs down there, and Doc is laid out dead. And then Doc wakes up, and he sits up, and he has a bulletproof vest on. And come to find out, he broke his own rule, because the letter he tore up from Marty from the past, he taped back together, and he read, oh, the Libyans are going to kill me on X date in 1985. So he wore a bulletproof vest. Now, something that I was always curious about is that the Libyans crash. The Libyans did not die. So what the fuck happened to the Libyans? They're still in the parking lot. Time to run, Doc and Marty. Don't sit there and talk. The fucking Libyans are over there in their van.
They're unconscious, I guess.
I guess the cops came and arrested the Libyans. I don't know, because you never hear about the Libyans again in this entire trilogy. And so Marty goes back, and as Rebecca said before, the future, or the present, I guess, 1985, has changed because Marty was in the past. His parents aren't sad sacks. Crispin Glover wrote a book, and Leah Thompson is hot. She's a hot 40-year-old. And everybody's happy. They live in the same house, but it's decorated better.
And he got his truck.
He got the truck, which Crispin Glover did not like. Now, if you've seen interviews with Crispin Glover, he talks about how he had a lot of problems with the ending of Back to the Future. Crispin Glover is anti-propaganda big time. He talks against propaganda all the time. He said that he thought it was fundamentally wrong to say that changing the past means that you're going to be wealthy in the future. And he thought Marty getting a truck gave the message that material things are the rewards in life, and that the family is wealthier, even though they live in the same house. But whatever. But
it was a nicer looking
It's a nicer version. It's still in the suburbs, so they must not be that much richer.
They remodeled the home.
Something that really interests me, though, is Crispin Glover has said this one mysterious thing that I've tried to look up endlessly and I couldn't find. He said that in the original script, because what happens is in the altered present, George is a writer, Leah is hot, and Biff, the bully from high school, is like their servant. He's waxing the car.
And he's very meek.
Very meek. He's lost his bite. But Crispin Glover says that in the original script, there was a major offensive thing that a lot of the cast members didn't like. And all he will say is somebody else was the servant. And I've always wondered, who was the servant in the original script if it wasn't Biff? And he said that they talked to Zemeckis and them about it, and they changed it. But I've researched everywhere, and if anybody watching this show knows who the original servant was that was so offensive, I would love to know, because I'm sitting here racking my brain like, are they talking about Goldie Wilson, the mayor? But he was already the mayor.
Yeah.
So why would he be the servant? Because Goldie Wilson was black and was African American. But I don't know. So if any of you guys watching know, hit me up. Tell me what's up. But Crispin Glover did not, he was very vocal about these problems. And this led to an issue when they came to do Back to the Future Part 2. Needless to say, the first one was very successful. But when they came to do 2, they were going to they came to do 2 and 3. Because at the end of the first movie, if you watch it now, it goes to be continued, as if it was always intended to be a trilogy. Actually, it wasn't. The original theatrical version just ended with the flash of them going into the future, because Doc Brown comes back, talks to Marty and Jennifer, says, "You got to come with me. Something's up with your kids in the future." They hop in the DeLorean, which now takes off and flies because it's from the future. And back in 1985, everyone thought in the future cars would fly. And so it flies and disappears. And in the original film, roll credits. In the version that we see now, it says "to be continued." Well, that was added for the VHS release. But when they decided, hey, this is a really successful movie, let's make more. And Robert Zemeckis was like, let's make 2 more and make it what I think is possibly the perfect trilogy, aside from the original Star Wars. But we won't get into that. That's a show for another day. So when they came time to cast part 2, several years had passed. They tried to get all the original actors back. Crispin Glover wasn't biting. And this is what Crispin Glover says. He says that when they came to do the deals for part 2 and 3, that everybody was given a pay cut except for Michael J. Fox. And he said that being a big part of those movies, he felt he should at least get paid more for the sequels than he did for the first one. Not equivalent to Michael J. Fox, but more than he got the first time, which is pretty standard if you return as an actor for a sequel.
Yeah. Or at least get the same.
Yeah, at least get the same. Bob Gale, though, was not interested in that. And they've had a war ever since. Bob Gale and Crispin Glover have gone back and forth because Bob Gale tells the story that Crispin Glover wanted as much money as Michael J. Fox, and they said no. Crispin Glover says that's a complete lie, that I never asked for the same amount of money as Michael J. Fox. I just wanted to be paid fairly for being a returning actor. I don't know who's right. It's not really my place to say. But whoever is right, Crispin Glover did not return for the sequels, even though growing up, I always thought Crispin Glover was in part 2 and 3. Did you?
Yes. When it first came out, I thought it was him.
You thought it was him too, Zach?
Yeah.
Well, the reason that you thought it was him is because they cut in footage from the original movie into part 2. And here is the real problem. They hired an actor with the same body type, and they took Crispin Glover's face cast from the original movie where they did the middle-age makeup. And they made Crispin Glover's face and put it on another actor for long shots.
For the old man.
Yeah, for the old man for long shots. Crispin Glover saw the movie and was like, wait, you can't put my face on someone else's body because they're going to think I'm in the movie. Oh, and by the way, you didn't pay for my likeness.
And they used footage of him, and they also used a photograph of him.
They
made the newspaper.
Yes, they used his photo in the newspaper. So basically, they made you think Crispin Glover was in 2 movies he wasn't in. And that you can't really do. So you know what happened, Zach?
Oh, someone got sued.
You're damn right. Crispin Glover sued Steven Spielberg, Bob Gale, and Robert Zemeckis. He's a ballsy motherfucker.
He brought Ben with him too, I bet.
Say what? Say that? Oh, Ben, yeah, from Willard.
Yes.
Well, that's what he did. He sued him, and he actually got the rules in the Screen Actors Guild changed. You can no longer do that. You can't use an actor's face in any sort of way to suggest that they're in a movie that they weren't actually in, and you have to pay them for their likeness. This caused a rift for a little while. Bob Gale, as I said, still doesn't like Crispin Glover, and I think the feeling is mutual. Robert Zemeckis and Crispin Glover have obviously patched things up because Crispin Glover played Grendel in Beowulf. So they're okay. But anyway, Back to the Future Part 2 went on with the Crispin Glover lookalike that wasn't Crispin Glover. But everybody else was in the movie except for Jennifer, the girlfriend.
Recast.
They recast her with Elizabeth Shue, who was from Karate Kid.
I was going to say hot off the Karate Kid.
Yeah. Hot off Karate Kid number one. Yeah. So now I want to talk for just a second about why I think this is the perfect film trilogy. The reason is because if you look at a screenplay, a good screenplay has 3 acts. You got act 1, the setup. You got act 2, the conflict, which is where everything falls to pieces, and then finally you pull it all back together, and then act 3, the resolution. If you look at Back to the Future, part 1, part 2, and part 3, you can actually make that one story as if it's one long screenplay. And the reason I say Star Wars, the original trilogy, is comparable to this is you can do the same thing with the original Star Wars trilogy. Part 1 is where you're setting up all the themes. Part 2 is where everything falls to shit. And then part 3 is where everybody comes back together and you get the final conclusion to the story. Now, part 2 of Back to the Future is a pretty dark movie. If you thought that the things that happened in part 1 were rough, you ain't seen nothing yet, because part 2, you got Biff in the future. I'm wondering how far should I go into this, because this is a big story.
It is.
And I feel like I'm talking an awful lot, but it's like the part 2, what happens is it picks up directly from the end of part 1. They go to the future. Crazy shit happens in the future. Should we really talk about anything other than old Biff?
Yeah, old Biff goes and steals the sports almanac. He steals Marty's idea to buy a sports almanac and go back in time and place bets and win a lot of money.
Yeah, and it's a shame Ryan isn't on this show today. We tried to get him on here, but the deal was I would love to get Ryan's reaction to this sports almanac. Because Biff, the old Biff, gets a sports almanac that has the result of every game, every sports event for 60 years. And he actually hijacks the DeLorean time machine when they're away doing other things that we won't go into because it's only an hour show. And he takes the DeLorean back to 1955 and he gives it to his younger, more assholey self, even though old Biff is kind of grouchy.
Yeah.
And that allows young Biff to have access to basically a wealth of money because he can bet on any sporting event for the next 60 years and absolutely, positively win. So basically, old Biff is setting it up where he thinks he's setting it up where he'll be rich when he goes back to the future, is what I'm assuming. That's not quite what happens because in a cutscene from Back to the Future Part 2, old Biff goes back to the future and then is erased from existence. Now, that is not in the final film, but you can see it on the DVD extras or Blu-ray extras. Why that happens, I don't know. I guess why he doesn't go back to the future of his timeline. See, this is the kind of thing we could go on forever about these times. So I'm not even going to go into that. The point is that when Marty goes back to 1985 from the future, he finds a very different world. A world where Biff has basically become a billionaire. He owns Hill Valley. And it's like a bikers convention every day. And everything has gone to hell. And somehow it's all become sleazy. Leah Thompson has fake breasts that are out to, they're as big as Michael J. Fox. And then, so he's like, what's going on here? This isn't, where's my nice house? Where's my dad that's a writer? Well, his dad is dead. Yeah, it's a little bit of a bummer. His dad was murdered.
Biff.
His dad was murdered by Biff, Zach.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, and Biff married his mother, but not before he was conceived. So the brother and the sister and Marty have the same parents, but then Biff murdered their father and married their mother and sent them away to boarding school, I guess, is what's said in the movie. So Marty goes and he finds Doc, and there's a great scene where, to keep the audience from getting too confused, Doc takes out a piece of chalk and a chalkboard and literally draws for you what you need to know about this story. Okay, this is the original timeline. Biff went back to 1955, changed something, which now skewed the timeline off into a tangent. And so what we have to do is go back to 1955 and get the almanac from Biff before he ever started using it. And that becomes basically what the film is about. This dark, horrible, biker-infested Hill Valley future where Biff has somehow turned the entire town to shit and built a monument to himself. And so they manage to find out when Biff gave the almanac to himself. And again, we go back to destiny because it was the same time Marty was there originally, which then sets up some really interesting stuff that I don't think had ever been done in a movie before, where you could actually use part 2 to go back and show events from part 1 from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a really, really cool idea. And it also saves some budgetary thing because you can use footage from part 1. So the movie then becomes about Marty in the past trying at every turn to get the almanac from Biff. Hey, Zach, do you think he succeeds?
I'm going to bet he does.
He does. And he burns the sports almanac because, by God, it caused a lot of trouble.
Oh,
and when he burned, it killed his father and everything else. When he burns the sports almanac, he has newspaper clippings and everything goes back to the way it was.
And Doc is no longer in the loony bin.
Yeah, Doc was put in a loony bin. Somehow Biff put Doc in a loony bin. But anyway, what happened then is the future is fine. Everything seems cool. Marty's got to jump into this time machine, and they're going to go back to 1985, and there's not going to be a part 3. Well, that seems like it's on track to happen until lightning strikes the DeLorean and Doc disappears. Then
it's like a half a second later. Was it? What?
It was like a UPS guy shows up or FedEx or something.
Union.
Yeah, Western Union shows up and gives Marty a letter from Doc that's dated 1885. And it basically says that I'm still alive. The time machine is hidden, but I'm trapped in 1885. And if you can find my 1955 self, then he'll help fix the time machine and get you back to 1985. But he says, don't come back for me because I'm fine. And so that leads into Back to the Future Part 3. How are you enjoying yourself over there, Zach? You look...
Oh, you're a wonderful storyteller. I'm just enjoying the story.
Well, you talked about Back to the Future Part 3 before we went on the air. That was the one that's set obviously in the Old West. Did you like that one or?
No, that was probably my least favorite, but I couldn't remember if they made any more after that or not. But that was the last one I saw, and I couldn't remember a lot of the second one. And then once you started going into it, I was like, oh yes. Biff's shrine to himself. I forgot about that. His big old I forgot about that whole movie. And then the third one was my least favorite. I really couldn't get into it. I think because of the whole Western theme that they went with. I was just like, yeah, this is such a stretch. I don't know.
So you weren't a big fan of the Western element?
No.
Well, what did you think about it, Beck?
I liked it. I also liked in part 1, Huey Lewis is like the main music. And then in part 3, they have ZZ Top, and they actually make an appearance in the movie.
Yeah, in the Old West.
In the Old West, they had the beards and their acoustic instruments.
I forgot about that. Oh wow.
I wasn't a big fan of that, so I like the Huey Lewis. Like every time I'm in a store and Power of Love comes on, I'm like da da. I'm like into that shit. I'm singing it to myself and shit. I'm like, yeah, Huey Lewis, man. I turn into Patrick Bateman basically when I hear Power of Love. I'm just like Huey Lewis. I start singing along and shit. But
that's how I am with It to Be Square. I just start,
Right, that's straight up Patrick Bateman right there. Hip to Be Square. It's like, where are the prostitutes? I need to murder one of them.
That one was off the sports album, though.
I'm so happy this chat went towards there. Okay, we can continue.
I had to throw in American Psycho. That was just for you, Zach, because I know you're having to listen to Back to the Future. So, American Psycho.
Thank you. The prostitute gets killed. Okay, now we can move on.
Now we can go back to the Old West. 1885. It's an interesting thing about this movie because what they do writing-wise is they do a role reversal. In this movie, Marty is just like trying to get Doc back to 1985. And the reason is because he saw Doc's tombstone in 55. These dates get really confusing. I hope everybody's following. 1955, Marty sees a tombstone that says Doc Brown was murdered. He researches the whole thing and realizes that Mad Dog Tannen, because this Biff family has all kinds of problems. Like Biff's great grandfather or whatever murdered Doc. And so he has to go back. Instead of going back to the present of 1985, he goes back to 1885 to rescue Doc. And that's the plot of the third film. By the way, spoilers, who hasn't seen Back to the Future? But what happens is you have this role reversal thing where Marty is this time saying, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this.
And you cannot stay.
You cannot stay in the past. You have to leave. And Doc keeps saying, well, the big thing is Mary Steenburgen. Mary Steenburgen comes into the story playing a character named Clara. And Clara is Doc's love interest, something we've never seen in the story before. Doc falls in love with somebody. So it's interesting. And if you see some documentaries, they talk about very clearly they wanted to make Doc into like the Marty character, and they wanted the Marty character to be like Doc. And it's interesting because, it's a new dynamic. You're 3 films in, 3 2-hour films in, you might as well change things up a little bit.
And also they kind of set it up for the West, because remember in part 2, they keep watching Clint Eastwood movies.
Yes.
And they set up the whole thing. So it wasn't in part 1 where they call him Chicken. Like in the Clint Eastwood. He's like, nobody calls me Chicken.
That's
and
right.
then he would fly off the handle to defend himself and get to a fight when someone called him Chicken, which led up to the Wild West.
And what's really cool too is there's a scene in part 2 where when alternate reality Donald Trump Biff is sitting in the hot tub and he's watching Clint Eastwood. And it's a scene where Clint Eastwood has this piece of iron that he uses as a
potbelly stove. Right,
from potbelly stove as a chest plate. Guy shoots him. Clint Eastwood stands back up and reveals, I got like a makeshift bulletproof vest, and then drops it. Completely throwaway thing until you see part 3, and they actually pay that off in a really cool way near the end, because essentially what happens is Marty, in defending Doc from Mad Dog Tannen, winds up getting challenged to a duel at sunrise, right?
Yeah.
In the main street of Hill Valley. And the whole idea is so they don't have gasoline. So they can't drive the DeLorean to 88 miles per hour. So the whole plot is them trying to figure out, well, how do we get the DeLorean up to the speed it needs to for us to go? And so they find this train, and then they figure out these logs that will somehow burn hotter and faster and make the train go faster. And they're going to make this Old West train go at an excess of 88 miles per hour using these Doc Brown invented magic logs. So it sets up this cool thing where you get to have an Old West train hijacking type thing, which is a trope of those kind of movies. And the shootout on Main Street is a trope of those kind of movies. And the whole idea is, well, Marty's like, I don't have to have the shootout, so I can antagonize Mad Dog all I want to, because we're going to be on the train. Well, come to find out, Doc's like, well, what if the train's late? Marty's like, wait, what are you talking about? The train being late. And so you can probably guess what happens is, well, you probably might not be able to guess this. Doc tells Clara the truth. And Clara is like, what do you think, I'm an idiot? And she smacks him. She slams the door in his face. And she's like, I'm enough of this. I'm going to leave on tomorrow's train. And Doc goes and gets drunk. And then Marty goes, finds Doc. And of course, it takes too long to get Doc sober again, because Doc took 1 drink and passed out, because Doc's a lightweight. And Mad Dog comes, and then they have to have the shootout, because it's like the Hitchcock thing. You don't show a gun in the first act unless you intend to use it in the third. So this shootout is going to happen whether the train is late or not. And then that's where Marty pulls out the Clint Eastwood thing, the thing he saw on the TV in Biff's big hot tub room. Mm-hmm. The whole room's a hot tub. And he does the potbelly stove thing where Mad Dog Tannen shoots him, and then Marty gets back up and he reveals the potbelly stove lid that's on his chest that caught the bullets. And he beats up Mad Dog because Marty's he's got some fisticuffs. There's a lot of fisticuffs
Well, he
going
does
on.
hit him with the thing.
He
Remember,
does.
he goes to look at him, and then Marty hits him with
Smacks him right in the face, yeah. And knocks him out and into the manure, which we haven't hit on, but there's a running joke throughout all three of the movies of these Tannen boys going in the manure. Biff actually gets into the manure twice, once in part 1 and once in part 2. And so anyway, they get back on the train. Clara's on the train, naturally, and they hijack it. And they're not going to take all these people and run them 100 miles per hour. So they undo the, what do they say? They uncouple the cars.
Yeah.
And then they just take because obviously the whole train would be, you'd have to pull it like crazy to get it up to that speed. So they're just going to take the engine part of it and go. And so they already have the DeLorean on the train tracks. They throw in the logs and they start going. Well, Clara has had a change of heart. And she winds up on this speeding engine with Doc and Marty. And they're trying to get back to the future, but in order to get back to the future, they have to get the train going, and then they have to climb around the front of the train, climb back into the DeLorean, because you got to be in the DeLorean or else this all is for naught, and speed. But the problem is, this again goes back to the ticking time bomb thing. There is a bridge that hasn't been completed yet. So the train on this particular track is heading toward certain doom if you don't get in that DeLorean, get it up to 88 miles per hour, and disappear into the future. But Clara is on the train. So what does that lead to, Rebecca?
Doc trying to save her. She's hanging from the train by her skirt. And then Marty's like, use my hoverboard, and shoots his hoverboard to Doc. And then Doc and her float off into the sunset on the hoverboard. And
the hoverboard comes from the year of 2015.
Where's my hoverboard?
Where's my fucking hoverboard? That hoverboard is 4 years late, and my car doesn't fly. Say that again, Zach.
These movies are filled with lies.
I tell you, I'll tell you, when I was a kid watching these in the late 80s and early 90s, I was totally convinced there would be flying cars. Like holographic sharks were going to come out of the front of theaters and try to bite me and shit like that. Like I knew there would be a hoverboard. And the only thing we've actually gotten are
Avatar?
We got Avatar and we got the self-lacing shoes. But we only got the self-lacing shoes because they made them especially for the movie. I don't think we would have gotten them otherwise, because in the future there are Nikes that self-lace. But anyway, what happens is they fly away. Doc winds up staying in 1885, and Marty goes back to the future. Doc stays with Clara, which they're outlaws. You ever thought about that?
Mm-hmm.
They're outlaws. They're going to be hunted.
But
bounty hunters.
But what's interesting, when he gets back to 1985, the car stops on a railroad track.
Yes, a modern railroad track. And he realizes there's a modern train heading right for the car. So Marty jumps out of the car, and the DeLorean time machine is totally smashed. And when I was a kid, I almost cried in the theater because I wanted that DeLorean time machine, man. It was heartbreaking. This whole fucking thing is predicated on this time machine, and there it goes.
Well, I think you can get DeLoreans and have them rebuilt.
You can, yeah.
There's
but
a whole special on that.
We do find out, though, that the present of 1985 has been restored. Biff is no longer Donald Trump.
Elizabeth Shue is still on the swing.
She's still on the swing.
Asleep.
Yep.
She slept through 2 movies.
She slept through like 2 timelines that changed around her. Now, why she would be in the same place in a different timeline, I don't know. But I accept it. Whatever. Yeah. You know, it's Back to the Future, man. You can't be. They actually put a lot of time into thinking about these tangents and stuff, and most of it lines up. Some of it doesn't, but you know, it's a movie. And so Marty ends up with Jennifer. The parents are fine. Crispin Glover's face is still on another guy's body, but he's a writer. And so there's a nice little coda to the movie where they go back to the wreckage of the DeLorean. And as a child in the theater, I'm still crying over it at this point. It's like 10 minutes later, I'm still crying a fucking DeLorean is destroyed. But what happens is there's a big blast of air and light, and we realize that Doc in the past has created another time machine, and it's a steam engine. And he's also created some kids. Mm-hmm. And one of these kids he really wants some screen time. Go ahead.
Oh, Jules and Verne.
Jules and Verne, because him and Clara's favorite author in 1885 was Jules Verne. They bonded over Jules Verne, so that's what they named their kids.
That's sweet.
And there's like a little boy. There are all kinds of memes and like YouTube videos based on one of these boys. I don't know if it's Jules or if it's Verne. But he's like really overacting in the background of all these scenes. Like at one point he's pointing to his crotch, and another point he's like waving at the camera. It's very odd. If you actually watch, it's very weird. I never really noticed it before until people started pointing out that he's like pointing to his crotch. I was like, why is he doing that? I was like, okay, whatever. But anyway, so you have a nice little coda.
How off camera?
Go ahead, Zach. Say that again.
It's like, I need to really have to pee. Get me the hell off camera.
Some people actually have said that. They're like, the kid must have had to go piss and, whatever. But anyway, what happens is you have a nice little coda where Marty ends up with Jennifer and Doc and Clara fly off with their, one son and then the overacting extra. And, and then the end appears because as is the case, or as should be the case with any perfect trilogy, it actually ends.
Can you count the cartoon?
I don't think we can get into the cartoon, but there was a cartoon, and I don't know if it's canon or not.
And every time they time traveled, there was always a version of Biff in that timeline.
Right.
The bad guy.
Yeah. But that's right, yeah. Because Biff is bad no matter who he is, whose kid or whose father he is or what. But I really want to make that distinction because the thing that makes a good story, I think, is that it actually comes to a conclusion. And that's what happens with the Back to the Future trilogy. There has never been a part 4. There should never be a part 4. The story has a beginning, has a middle, and has an end. And the end is the end. And that's what makes it distinctive. And I think possibly the perfect film trilogy. Because unfortunately, not even Star Wars have had that luxury. They just keep making that sucker. And it's really amazing that no one's swooped in. And you always hear these stories, and so far they've all been rumors, and hopefully they always will be, about Back to the Future being remade. They're not remaking it. They're not doing a 4th one as of yet. I hope I die before they ruin the perfect capsulated trilogy. But I'm sure one day.
You could just always do like Indiana Jones and just ignore the 4th one.
Yeah, that's true. But it's kind of hard for me because even if you talk about, and we're about to wrap up here, but even if you talk about things like Prometheus, and we're going to do, I intend to talk more about Alien on another show because that's like a whole different thing. But here's the thing, like even when you as you say about the 4th film, you can forget it. When I think about the first Alien movie, I've seen Prometheus. So now the mystery of who that space jockey was is forever destroyed because in my mind, I know it's that fucking engineer. I can never erase that from my mind, But the thing about Back to the Future is they made 3, and now it's just is what it is. It's bookended, and it's, in my opinion, quite a perfect trilogy. Zach, what do you think? I said that way more aggressively than I was actually intending.
What do you think? If they wouldn't have messed up in my opinion, the 3rd one so much, I think it would have been a pretty awesome trilogy. But after seeing a lot of these, newer movies that they've come out with and stuff in the past, 6 or 7 years, the 3rd one's looking pretty good. So yeah, it's not a bad trilogy.
Yeah, because there's nothing, like there's been no reboots to mess it up or anything, and that's, we were talking about Terminator like last week or whenever we did that show, and that's the thing, you keep getting these reboots, you can't erase them from your mind, they're always there, so any new one is not special anymore because I just saw it. I mean, we just did this. So, but thankfully up until now, Back to the Future has been pretty well preserved. Actually, it hasn't been completely preserved.
It's always a tragedy when they remake a movie that you grew up. I mean, and grew up watching and loving, and and for me, with being such a horror fanatic, every freaking movie that I've liked or been obsessed with growing up, they've remade pretty much. And so yeah, I really hope I'm with you on that. I really hope they never touch Back to the Future, because I mean, I'm so sick of them just butchering classic films.
I agree completely. And fingers crossed. Let's all cross our fingers. Rebecca, cross your finger. Zach, you got your fingers crossed?
I'm crossing them.
All right. Well, these crossed fingers are hopefully going to signify that we're never going to see another Back to the Future film, and we're going to keep what we got in perfect shape. But anyway, I'd like to hear what the audience thinks about the Back to the Future trilogy. If you don't think it's a perfect trilogy, that's perfectly fine. Tell me about it. Why not? I'm up to all kinds of opinions. That's the great thing about this show, is we don't always have to agree. But I think, Becca, you agree, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I really enjoy them. The only thing there are two things that I kind of have an issue with is the Crispin Glover thing in part 2, because obviously he probably would have been in it more if he was able to return. And also in part 3, he meets the first McFlys in America, and it's played by him and
Michael J. Fox
and Lee Thompson. I'm thinking, she's a Baines. Why is she? That would have made sense if it was the Baines. But if he was in it, if Crispin Glover had not had the falling out, would he have been the grandfather, and they would have had a different lady playing the grandmother, or
I get the feeling he would, but I think Leah Thompson, even though it doesn't make sense, probably would have still been the grandmother.
My brain, that bothers me. But overall, I love the movies. I mean, I can watch them nonstop, never get tired of them. I'm
willing to bet you Crispin Glover would have played that part.
Yeah.
Because they have said that they cut his George McFly pretty much all the way out. Not so much in 2, but in 3, because George is barely in 3 because Crispin Glover didn't come back. But anyway, so you those are your only reservations?
That's my only. Yeah. When even before I even knew all this stuff, I remember as a kid thinking, But yeah, no, I can watch them over and over and never get tired of them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's our opinions, guys, and everyone can have their own. I hope you enjoyed the show. Beck, thanks for being here with me. Zach, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. And I will see you, and I will see you, and I will see you next week. Take care of yourselves.